Good afternoon, and thank you again for investing your time in this conference today. I didn't get a chance before. My name's John Fleming. I'm the General Manager for ASIAL, and today we have an amazing panel discussing sustainability in the security industry, a call to action. The panelists today will share their insights on actionable approaches and innovative solutions for greening security operations, from transitioning to renewable energy and developing energy-efficient technologies. Before we start, I'll just take a few moments to introduce our moderator for today and the panelists. Our moderator is Nathan Ashgiri. He's a solutions architect for Q Systems Australia. Between trying to keep universities and schools and TAFEs happy with their QSys deployments in Australia, Nathan works with TAG directors to develop and improve sustainability in the AV industry. On our panel today, we've got Johnny Lee. Johnny's the Business Development Manager for Transport, Cities and Critical Infrastructure for Axis Communications. Johnny has over 15 years' experience in building technology ecosystems and has focused on bringing solutions and partners together to address environmental issues into the market. We've got Gabriel Daher, who's the Vice President and General Manager at Inner Range. He oversees product development, manufacturing, sales, channel strategies. He's got a background in electronics and extensive experience managing engineering and product development teams. Gabriel brings a demonstrated, robust blend of technical and leadership skills to the panel. And last but not least, we've got Pete Swanson, who's a digital technology lead at Mott MacDonald in Australia. With over 25 years' experience in consulting, contracting, technical manufacturing, Pete brings a wealth of knowledge in design, deployment and operation of technology within the built environment. Starting his career in the AV industry, he has led projects in the corporate education, government and leisure and entertainment sectors. I'll hand over now to Nathan, and you're in good hands.
Thanks very much. Apologies to everybody, my voice is a bit croaky today, so please bear with me. And thanks for coming out. So today we're going to try and hone in on the ways in which the hardware security industry can improve its carbon footprint and reduce negative environmental and human impacts for a better future. We're all responsible clients, consultants, integrators, manufacturers to play a pivotal role in moving things forward. And so I look forward to some of the answers we'll get from the questions today. Just to start off, I'll ask each of you, what are some of the ways the security equipment sector can reduce its environmental footprint and contribute to a broader sustainability improvement? I'll start with you, Johnny.
Thank you. So it's quite an interesting one because Axis Communications, as a manufacturer of security surveillance products, what we do is we've been looking at our asset lifecycle management for the past, well, actually since 2007, and we do our analysis reports and making sure that we can improve every single year, and that's our main objective, is to continue improving and understanding what it is that's done that can be more efficient. And what we've found, funny enough, is that the carbon footprint from our products are actually largely contributed from the usage of security cameras. So we've invested into more or less making sure that when you actually utilize a product of ours, power consumption is significantly less through some of the technologies and research and development. On top of that, we've also got that you want to be able to make the products last so that it's not going through a faster life cycle. And then looking to the other side is also from a customer's site, we want to ensure that bandwidth consumption is low, so therefore they use less hardware when it comes to storage as well.
Great. And just with that product lifecycle, do you publish how long you expect something to last versus the time that it's warranted for?
Yes, absolutely. So, look, standard in the market is around 5 years for warranty. We provide documentation for mean time before failure. That generally sits at around 11 years. And what we see is, the longest one I've seen so far, I think, is about a 20-year-old camera. So still operating? Is it the most effective? Probably not. So there is the technology changes that you will have to upgrade, with future proofing.
Fair enough. Sorry, I will interject with questions every now and then because I am a blow-in from the AV industry, and it is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Pete, over to you.
Thank you. So from a design perspective, obviously we look a lot at the various parameters impacting the solutions we're designing. And increasingly today, carbon is one of those key factors. So really it's looking at and understanding, as Johnny touched on, the energy consumption profile, but also considering the actual inherent carbon impact just at the point of production and as a product arrives at an environment. Excuse me. So in that respect, one of our real focus areas is raising awareness that there is actually a substantial impact with any electronics that are produced today. This is something that's becoming really important from the perspective of all the net zero commitments that organizations, whether it's corporations, governments, institutions, have made around net zero, and working through scope 1, which is things that you burn directly, gas, oil, diesel, etc. Scope 2, which is where you use electricity and somebody else burns gas or oil or diesel to make that electricity. And coming to scope 3, which is everything else. So, call to actions in the title of today. And the key point that we're really seeking to highlight is readiness and understanding that carbon associated with the products that we deploy is going to become a factor that we have to measure. So that's how we look at that question, saying, what can you do in terms of bringing a focus to sustainability and design, recognizing there are a lot of other factors as well, but raising that, I suppose, from the consultant perspective, looking forward over the coming horizon, we say this is one of the next challenges that is coming that we need to factor into design and construction of the coming years.
Great. So like the idea that in order to change something and improve it, you have to measure it as a starting point.
Exactly.
And so I know you've been doing some work in the AV industry, and you have a 25 kilos per square meter number for AV's impact. Have you started any work on the security sector?
So we've begun some work there, and so the work that our team does is probably, I suppose, threefold. So one is when we talk with manufacturers, it's talking about whether there's an awareness of embodied carbon figures for products. Ideally, we love, in the same way as you can get different parameters around size and power and whatever else, to also have carbon data coming from manufacturers, because that's most likely to be accurate and real. But then we also look at tear down life cycle analysis methods where we can just sort of look at the composition of a product and come up with an estimate just to start to get there. And then the third part is actually educating the client side that this is something that they're going to have to be aware of. Because as I say, right now, we've been pretty much through scope 1 and getting through scope 2 for most organizations, but scope 3 is really big and challenging. So I guess we're trying to help to break that down into those bite-sized chunks.
Great, thank you. Now, Gabriel, do you remember the question that I asked originally? Over to you.
I do. I think you wanted to understand sort of what are some of the key challenges, in particular an Australian manufacturer has in relation to addressing some of these sustainability issues. So look, I think fundamentally Australian manufacturing, particularly in terms of sort of electronic manufacturing, which is what we do, and that is primarily based in our Melbourne facilities. It's extremely challenging because it's really operating in a sort of environment where there is very little sort of critical mass to draw on. And a lot of the sort of benefits that we would see in manufacturing facilities overseas is simply those cottage industries that sort of surround the manufacturing facilities. We used to sort of have it in Australia. Probably the last major one was probably the car industry and all the associated cottage industry around that. So it's very difficult for us. And so when it comes to the real key challenges for us, it is fundamentally around, one, the type of investments you need to make. Obviously, our the biggest impact we can have is in terms of energy use, and so electronic PCBA manufacturing is quite energy intensive. If you think about the big machines that are sort of laying the components down, you think about the soldering stations and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of energy going into these processes. And so there are large investments in terms of new equipment, more cost-effective, more energy-efficient equipment, of course. And then there are the investments in terms of the sort of renewable energy. So, whether that's, solar, batteries, etc., all of those are very big investments. And again, the critical mass issue really impacts the return on those investments. In other words, the return cycle. So, in a very sort of high, production environment, you might get returns in some number of years. In Australia, it's considerably longer than that. So it's a very long-term investment. And so there's some of the challenges. We also have to source a lot of components from overseas. And, we have hundreds and hundreds of components on across all of our products. Some boards have, well over 100 different components on that board. And they're going to come from different suppliers from different parts of the world. And some of those suppliers themselves have actually multiple facilities across the world. And so it's this sort of web of trying to figure out, what is the sort of sustainability footprint for those suppliers and down to each component. And so those things are very challenging. So, ISO 14001 is sort of the base that we use. We obviously run the facility to that standard, and then and we sort of rely on suppliers to sort of also comply to that. But like with many ISO standards, it's not a guarantee, that things are sort of world class. Is this my best side? Thank you. And then look, finally, I think, in the top three, sort of number three really is around the sort of whole sort of waste management and how do we deal with that. There are some solutions for that, but you've got to really, to make that effective, you've got to deal with it at the front end. There's just no point at the end of a production facility, a production line. You've just got a whole lot of waste to deal with. You really got to work very hard to just simply minimize that waste, because getting rid of it is actually quite complicated. So they're sort of the three top challenges. There's obviously a whole range of other issues we have to deal with as an Australian manufacturer, but certainly they're tough issues, and we can talk later about some of the things we're doing to address that.
Well, yeah, I was going to cut and say, well, what are the benefits you found to, just to stay on you for a little bit longer, Gabriel, some benefits you found to manufacturing in Australia or setting up manufacturing in Australia?
Can you repeat the question?
Just wondering, you've talked about a lot of the challenges of setting up sustainable processes in Australian manufacturing. Has there been any success stories or things that you found were easier to do?
I don't know about success stories per se. What we're doing to address it, there are a number of things we're doing to address it, and clearly, if we had 100% clean energy, etc., we had no waste and so forth, life would be simple. That's simply not the case. In Australia, we just don't have those things. And more importantly, even if you had those things, they're going to be very expensive. And our customers are typically not going to pay much more than a 10 or 15% delta for that. And so, we can do all those things, but I won't be here next year to have another conversation with you probably. So the way we're addressing those issues is we're simply looking to reduce the total footprint that we impact the world with. And so it sort of starts at the at the production itself, where we are looking to sort of reduce our component count on the boards, by 30 to 50%. And there's almost a direct correlation between reducing your component count and the flow through for that. So because it ultimately relates into terms of time that you're using energy for, and so you almost get a similar percentage in terms of energy consumption. So that automatically reduces your position by 30 to 50%. It also does something really important in terms of wastage. The less components we have on a board, the simpler the boards are. We essentially end up with less errors and less wastage. And so we try. Right now we're getting close to 100% yields, and that almost gives us no wastage. Now there may be a point something or % there, which we then try to rework and put back into production. So these are very, very big issues that we're dealing with, and that's just at the factory. The way we see the world is the factory is just sort of is part of the chain. There's the sort of R&D development factory, and then the whole life cycle of the product, which we could talk about later.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, the proliferation of sensor technology and the changes to the way that things are deployed. Or, I mean, as I said, I come from the AV industry, so it's possibly a blind spot for me. But yeah, I think that there may be something interesting to be said about the use of smart technology and sensors to kind of reduce what otherwise may have been a more carbon-intensive footprint. Johnny, do you want to talk to that at all?
Yep, look, more than happy to. So, quite an interesting topic, because there's a few points that I'd probably cover off. Part of it is towards manufacturing. The other part is also towards the smart technology as to how to use essentially a camera, but to help the environment as well. So, an interesting fact that I had actually discovered is that bushfires contribute to, in 2021, bushfires had contributed to about 1.7 million tonnes of carbon emissions. So therefore, our solutions developing using cameras and artificial intelligence to detect before a bushfire occurs. Generally, when a bushfire is about to occur, there's going to be smoke. The likes of big infrastructure customers, they put these on their towers, they pan around, they scan. When there's a smoke detection, they can then immediately geolocate where the location is, send out essentially the fire team and put out the fire, and that is avoiding as much as possible some of these major contributors to carbon emissions. That's just one of them. There's other ones where it's helping to save lives in the aspect of understanding floods. If there's water levels rising towards rivers and things like that, being able to warn residents, that's very important. The other aspect goes back towards the manufacturing aspect of what Axis does. So we have to ensure that where our products contribute the most to carbon emissions, we want to be able to help educate our customers to understand how to utilize our products, and then also how to actually maximize some of the technologies, such as the power consumption that I was talking about before, and also the bandwidth consumption. Largely, when you look at Axis as a company, many people will say products are expensive, but then you have to look at the R&D that goes into the background to make sure that our products sit, 50%, 40 to 50% less power consumption. And then on top of that, we do a lot of testing with competitor products, and just to make sure that even our carbon emissions in terms of thermal output, and this is looking at our thermal cameras, we're significantly lower with our heat signature as well. So 1 or 2 cameras, not a big deal, but when you're looking at customers that are using thousands of cameras for a road network, you've got retail where they use hundreds of cameras per retail store, that could be a huge contributor when you look at it a global aspect as well.
Now, forgive my ignorance on this, but are they all wired or are a lot of them wireless?
They are wired. There are also wireless solutions as well. So we do have quite a lot of partners that do interesting solutions where they do rapid deployment on top of a mountain. It'll basically have a solar panel, camera, 4G, or might be any type of wireless solution, and basically it'll be there to detect bushfires or even wildlife. So there is different types of solutions. Our most commonly used would be hardwired.
Mine too, in my HG. Pete?
Yeah, look, I think there's a really good theme to unpack here. You know, Gabriel started that off in terms of getting the most out of the materials, and then Johnny's touched on that in terms of getting the most out of the product. And I think this is something we can see as well as thinking about, you know, inherently trying to reduce things like the carbon load of an individual product. It's also saying, how can I get more out of a given solution? So, you know, if we think about maybe the office or commercial or retail environment, perhaps I've got cameras in place, of course, now, as well as the primary security. I can use that for people counting and so on. But equally, I can also look at things like from the access control point of view in commercial office. You know, there's a lot of efforts gone into people deploying lots of specific people counting sensors into offices. That has mixed benefits and tends to be quite costly in terms of both the number of sensors deployed and the mechanisms, the networks behind them. So instead being able to look and say, well, actually, access control tells me pretty clearly how many people come into the building. My Wi-Fi perhaps can tell me about the behavior of devices moving around the building. Devices tend to move with people. But, you know, there's this contention around the idea of, well, how many devices is somebody carrying? So I can unpack that and say, okay, well, I can use access control to know how many people attended, but then I can look at the behavior of device movement to give me a sense of the pattern of movement without then feeling that I must go and deploy more sensors. So I think it's that kind of mindset, really saying, whether it's getting the raw material and getting the highest yield out of that, or saying, what products am I going to deploy? How can I get the most functionality out of that? How many different use cases can I satisfy? I think that's a really important mindset for the design and then the operation ongoing.
Yeah, and perhaps it might be a higher investment in that platform or solution.
Definitely.
But I guess the trade-off is not having to deploy as many sensors or similar devices.
Yeah, and look, I'll just briefly touch on that one, because in terms of the way that we work on projects, we take a very holistic view. We're typically working across audio-visual, security, ICT, systems integration to the various building services. And one of the reasons for that is that broad view doesn't tend to come from when you're focused on an individual design discipline or service. It's actually quite hard to sort of get the context up and across the project scope. So you really need to be able to bring that thinking from the top down and then say, you know, I can leverage this security capability into another area that would traditionally be outside the scope of that security design. So I think as we move forward into this area, that's where it's really important to bring that holistic thinking and design to find, you know, potentially unrealized opportunities.
There can be a bit, my previous employer, the University of Sydney, you know, having done a lot of building projects, all of the services and people, you know, different departments are heavily siloed to the point where their design, and like understandably so, we as audiovisual people remotely supporting rooms, I mean, we're not supposed to have access to security cameras, but it does mean that we'll have rooms that have multiple cameras for the purposes of video conferencing. We'll usually, every room would have an access camera in it, little PTZ, so we could do remote support, know what was going on in the room, and then security would have their cameras as well. So I'd like to think that universities are heavily siloed and everybody else isn't, and you can do this kind of holistic solutions. All right. Gabriel, do you have anything to add to that particular?
Other than there are good reasons why security doesn't trust the AB guys. Okay, well, I mean, we can talk about that later if you like. Look, I like Pete's point. I mean, I think the world is looking to explode in terms of IoT. So it's absolutely we're looking at a future potentially of just having more sensors in these buildings, and the reality is, adding extra sensors, that's a problematic issue. There's no question about that. From from the energy used to install them, and then for them running for the next 10 or 15 years, etc. So it's an issue, and I think efficiency around that is quite critical. I think the key thing that we're doing around addressing the product piece is around the life cycle of the product. We expect to get 15 to 20 years life cycle out of our products, and possibly longer. And the way to do that is to deal with that issue right up front in terms of the design. So, and the key principles are ensuring that the products are designed in a very modular way, so that one, you're only using what you need. You're not forcing people to just use large, printed circuit boards when they don't need half of those components. And then that modular design also really supports, upgradability. So rather than the entire system having to be upgraded, there may be only certain sort of components that may need to be upgraded. Classic example might be the cellular modem. Given that the carriers decide to change their Gs every, few years. So those sorts of design issues, and we're building a lot more of that. That is really our key focus, so that our fundamental footprint is spread across a very, very long period of time, and I think that is a very good outcome, relative to some other product life cycles that may be only 5 years, for example. And so that's really important. The other really important piece for us is to look at reducing the labour effort in terms of those installations, and we think we can reduce that by up to 50%. And a lot of that's going to come back to sort of wireless technologies, etc. And so that is quite fundamental. It does have a downside in terms of the batteries, but it has the upside of less time and less material on site, which dramatically reduces the energy output, and of course it has no running power cost, which is because it's a stored energy that's in the device. And what we believe is that if we can get that life cycle in those battery operated devices to 10 years and beyond, which we believe we can, then that actually has some really, really good payback benefits. So they're the sort of things we're doing.
So that rather than having copper wire, I guess the e-waste and end of life management becomes, you got 10 years to kind of refine battery. I mean, it's already happening now, but battery recycling is extremely important to being able to recover materials from that.
It ultimately, so yes, we are pushing the problem down the road in terms of efficient battery, whether it's recycling or some sort of waste management. However, if you can push that battery change to 10 or more years, then that's actually going to still give you better outcomes than wiring everything up.
And I think this is a great example where if you then unpack that and you look at the carbon impact as well of that copper, that copper, that cabling isn't carbon free. So actually putting that device in and really thinking about it and saying, okay, if it's a 10-year battery life and I already know it can be recycled in this way, or I can see what's coming in recycling technology versus the copper impact versus other reliability considerations, and this comes back to, or maybe it's 240 volt wired, but it's wireless, so I don't have to run the other things. And I think the important point is there's no one winning answer here, but it's actually asking the question. And so it's really thinking about and unpacking and keeping your eyes open to maybe batteries are really good in some situations. We've got a project at the moment which involves thousands of lockers around a workplace, and the idea of those, which may or may not make it to 3 to 5 years and have a couple of double A's and whatever, you shiver at the idea of the human effort, not to mention the recycling impact there. But then you look at some other, perhaps, less dense requirements and lower power requirements. Well, batteries might be really good there. So I think this is a really important point, is that it's not that there's one clear answer. You go, batteries are evil, wired is great, but actually understanding those fundamental metrics. And again, as I say, this is why I bang on about embodied carbon, because I think as we understand more about the carbon impact of each kind of product, and as we have to deal with this anyway, it's going to help us to do that accounting math to say, well, look, this is the carbon over here with this solution, this is the carbon there, this is the cost, performance, etc.
Yeah, I think battery recycling is going to have to be resolved one way or another, given all of the other industries leveraging it.
Just to add, I think dealing with that upfront cost. So, in other words, if you can trade, an installation cost, if you can trade the cost of, let's say, some, extra hardware cost against quite a substantial reduction in your installation cost. These are key drivers, right? These are key behavioral drivers. And, you're not just doing it for cost reasons, but you're at least not facing the headwind that, many people have faced in terms of these approaches, because you've got an offset. So this is even better than carbon offsets, Pete. So you can have a labor offset, right? So that's a really important piece, I think, if you want this to have sort of mass adoption.
I think we already touched on a little bit, but in the next 5 years, what are we thinking is going to be the focus of sustainability in the security sector? I mean, Gabriel, you've already kind of answered that, I think. So you're off the hook for this one. You can if you want. Johnny, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yep. Look, this is a good one, because over the next 5 years, I mean, you look at the last 5 years, how much has technology advanced? Everyone's talking about AI now, and it's the buzzword, but when things start taking off, I think that's when it's really going to start speeding through, the processing of information, being able to automate almost everything. From my perspective, I heavily work with a lot of the road operators and things like that. Being able to see that they can create more efficient traffic modeling, it actually does help significantly reduce how long a vehicle is on the road, how much traffic you actually have will dictate how much carbon emissions the vehicles are actually causing. So things like that, understanding, using the AI models to understand more of how things operate, will help us in turn become more sustainable in many ways. And that's more from that end customer aspect, being the users of our products. For us, it's largely about monitoring our manufacturing process. It's understanding that every year we want to be improving what we were doing previously, and keeping our numbers low in the sense of carbon emissions, but also being able to increase our sales to be sustainable as a business as well. And we've been doing that quite well from my belief, but I also see a bit of a gap or maybe a bit of a darkness to the side of sustainability, in the sense that there are manufacturers, and this is largely across manufacturing, is that if you manufacture 1 million, let's say, cameras, and you only sell, let's say, 700,000, the question comes down to what actually happens to the remaining. And a lot of manufacturers actually have to dispose of the remaining, as opposed to be able to repurpose them, maybe even recycle them. But the cost of recycling can be very costly. So over the next 5 years, I think there's a lot of regulations that need to be put in, standards set so that everyone actually really bumps up what they're doing as an overall.
That's I guess the product, once it's produced, is never going to be more carbon efficient at the time, and knowing that they're then just going to get recycled is pretty shocking. I mean, look, I talk about this a lot. I'm kind of holding back a bit here because it's not my industry, but I've constantly referred to the I guess, sustainability in the AV industry as a total mess. I mean, there's ways forward and the kind of things Pete's been looking at, but I'm more dealing on the e-waste side of things, and it is not easily dealt with. Yeah. Pete, did you want to talk about the next 5 years?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's a great example there. We haven't talked much today about using products at the end of their current life. We've talked a bit about, the reality of a product coming to the end of a functional life, and sometimes shockingly, as Johnny just described, potentially before it's even been sold to anyone. But I think looking at where a product can be redeployed and whether that's in whole or in part, how much of the chassis can come back to the original manufacturer to have new electronics fitted within it to upgrade it or repair it, whatever that might be. So I think that's going to be an important part. And I think we're going to see that continuing to grow. The circular economy is, again, another sort of buzz theme or whatever, but absolutely is growing. I think carbon accounting will just be a fact of life in 5 years' time because so many people have made commitments, and whether or not we all agree on what the numbers are and so on, it will be something that we have to contend with, and there'll be opportunity within that. And then I think thirdly, really it's around, we've already touched on it, but we're still on this journey to integrated communication environments. A sophisticated building will typically have one main integrated network. It may have one main processing, compute, storage environment, and a well thought out approach to backing that up, or some of that existing in the cloud. I think we're going to continue to see that evolution, which is just going to make it easier and more effective to cross-pollinate, cross-leverage data between systems and sensors and so on. But I also think that in 5 years, we'll probably still be on that journey because we're just continually evolving in that space.
Sorry, Gabriel, I will get you to answer this one if you would like.
Sorry, what was the question?
I will. Was just over the next 5 years, what changes do you see coming in the industry
Well, I think
from a sustainability perspective? That is.
Yeah, look, I think in terms of at least the security industry, I think it is a combination of the items that both Johnny and Pete talked about. So we absolutely see that the intelligence on the edge, processing more about what's happening, and then being able to use that information for whatever means. So if the organisation wants to use it to understand people movement, they could do that. If they want to understand how to address energy usage in a building, they could do that. So it's not a single sort of function, sort of analytical process. So we absolutely want to, and we are today creating techniques and algorithms to ultimately allow the customer to essentially use that information in whatever ways they want to use it for. So it's not a one size fits all future, right? And I certainly don't like predicting the future, because you see all these YouTube videos where famous people are predicting the future and they never get it right, and I don't want to be in that same category. Not that I'm famous, but but certainly our current developments, do look out a good 5 or more years, and they're the sort of areas that we are working on today.
Great. I think we might go to some questions. If anybody has any, can't quite see with this light.
Just thinking about initiatives and adopting sustainability policies, how do you impact that in the culture of your organisation? That seems another. You've gone through a number of things today, reflecting on Gabriel, talking about 15-year life cycle on your products, and you look at telephony, Apple, 2-3 years, people want to flick it, move that on. I know in the AV industry, a new television comes out. I just recently got rid of 2 TVs. They were old. And then people coming in behind me with, 2-year-old TVs that were working perfectly well, going straight into e-waste. So it's a massive problem. I think you've highlighted a number of, really difficult questions, how we manage this and the waste for the future. But a fascinating conversation. But if you could see how that impacts in culture, that would be great. If you want to take that.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah. Thanks, Johnny.
So What we do largely is the educational side as to how these products can be then repurposed, reutilised. If let's just say a critical infrastructure uses a set of cameras, maybe 500-600 cameras.
Yeah.
When they come to the end of their asset life cycle, which might be, let's call it 7 years, 7 to 10 years, at the end of that, those cameras can then be repurposed for, let's say, schools, for a lot of other purposes. So it's more or less being able to work in that ecosystem with each other to understand where can we actually put these things that are repurposed. They might not need it as a critical asset. It's just more or less a nice to have to help do some monitoring. So that is part of how we try to repurpose these this type of solution in security aspect. Any of you guys have more to add?
Look, I think for me, culture really determines whether or not you pursue more opportunities. So, and I'll portray slightly unrelated, but two organisations I worked for early in my career both had ISO 9001. In the first organisation, it was an absolute engine for efficiency and quality, and it was just like, even though some of the things were a bit annoying, you could see how it helped you to get your projects done more efficiently. In the second organisation, they'd basically done it because they'd seen they had to have ISO 9001 on some tenders, and they found it really annoying and didn't get any real benefit out of it. And the fundamental difference was the cultural attitude to why they had it. And I think that's the same with sustainability. If you don't have a shared cultural view on what you're doing and what kind of initiatives you're pursuing, and that can be across varied aspects. It doesn't have to be pure greenie or whatever else. But if you don't have that common view, you're not going to go and explore and try and find more opportunities. If you do have that common view, then whether it's electric vehicles or manufacturing efficiency or repurposing end of life, any of these topics, you're going to go out and look for them. So I think it's absolutely imperative, and the key thing is it can come from the grassroots, but if it's not up at leadership level, it's probably not going to go far.
I'm going to jump in there and talk about Technical Audio Group, who I work for QSYS Australia, but Technical Audio Group is the distributor who look after this as well as 3 other brands. And the leadership aspect, the owners of the company have been really the drivers of all sustainability initiatives at the company. So every time a major decision to purchase something is made, they kind of take that into account. Recently purchased a warehouse. Previously, we're using a third-party logistics company for storage and for moving things around. And so they had the opportunity to purchase a large warehouse with a large solar array and fully electrified the entire fleet, which is quite boring, really. Like that's kind of normal stuff that anybody can do. But they had that investment, and then when they started seeing that there's an opportunity to do our own driving, they also bought an 8-ton EV truck a couple of years ago, which at the time, quite a large investment, still probably is. They were always quite happy to use some of the profits from the business to take risks or make investments. That truck is turning out to be really good because we're able to offer a more specific delivery service that is a lot more tolerant to people being there or not being there, unlike what a third-party logistics company can do. Did take a little while to get people comfortable with driving the truck. They just didn't want to touch it. But we found somebody, and now it's working really well. And likewise, we're also in-housing some of our end-of-life procedures. So we have a product stewardship policy from a distributor perspective. So any products that we distribute can be brought back. Generally, they're brought back by integrators. After having installed some new products, they'll bring back some old products. We actually don't mind if they're not our products either. But now we are working with some e-waste processes, one chemical, Mint Innovation, and we actually need a new mechanical one now. I think there's been a company just bought out. I've got a meeting on Friday about it. But so we're trying to find the best places to process e-waste locally in Australia. Because it's the only place we can have any transparency and visibility on seeing what happens. It's all a bit of an experiment from our perspective at the moment, but spending a bit of money to try and do things right is kind of coming from the top down. Sorry, Gabriel, did you want to?
Look, first of all, I agree. it really has to be driven top down, because these typically take large investment decisions, right? So now top down doesn't necessarily mean the idea came from the top. So the grassroots is also still very important. I suppose in our world, at InnoRange, we're fundamentally an engineering organisation, and so adhering to standards, and a particular one here is 14001, is a normal part of what engineering people do. So standards are important because they do form the framework, right? Otherwise, that's hard, right? And so culturally, we are essentially always operating at the most, highest levels of efficiency. Efficiency for us is sort of just another language that we speak, and it happens to be great for sustainability, right? And then our parent company, Wesco, is one of the largest logistics companies in the world. I mean, they're a distributor, but they're fundamentally, the back end is logistics. And you don't operate, in 50 countries, 800 locations around the world if you are not extremely efficient. And so we have that sort of culture with both in InnoRange and also Wesco for two very different reasons, coming from two different places. But that is really, that continues to drive us, and that certainly will set us on a good path going forward, I think.
That's great. Thanks for the informative discussion today on sustainability. I think the panel and the moderator have done a fantastic job. If you could put your hands together for them, that would be great. So thank you, Gabriel, Pete, Johnny and Nathan. That was fabulous.